Welcome to Infectious Disease Lesson 3.3, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the War Card Game. The goals of this lesson are to see examples of how pathogenicity is a host-microbe interaction and explore the relationship between the most important immune barriers and clinically significant pathogens. At the end of the lesson, the students should be able to give 2 examples of virulence factors pathogens use to avoid the host's immune barriers, and describe the symptoms of 2 infectious diseases they have not studied before today. We will achieve these goals by playing a war card game with a pathogen team, immune team, and judge. The game emphasizes that pathogenicity is a function of virulence factors and the circumstances of infection. And at the end of the game, the students will reflect on the outcomes of each case in the game. To prepare for this lesson, you'll need to review the following key scientific concepts. Pathogens use virulence factors to overcome host immune barriers. The interactions between pathogen and host result in clearance of the infection, chronic infection, or death of the host. And most infections are eliminated or controlled by the host immune response. You can review this scientific content in the background reading provided for you in the teacher primer, the teacher manual, and the student workbook. The teacher primer provides in-depth knowledge about the scientific content presented in this lesson. The teacher manual or lesson plan provides a minute-by-minute explanation of the lesson structure, and the student workbook provides additional explanation for students. Note that an annotated version is also available for teachers. Be sure to print the lesson worksheet and the card game materials, which include the pathogen cards, body cards, wild cards, and judging tables, all of which can be found in the Lesson 3.3 Classroom Materials folder. The key points of the do now are that pathogens must get past host immune barriers, and there are immune barriers outside of the skin, which are non-sterile, and inside the skin, which are sterile. We'll get there by reviewing the immune barriers introduced in Lesson 1.5. The do now begins by reviewing the sterile and non-sterile parts of the body. In preparation for the card game, we have the students use their knowledge of the immune barriers from Unit 1, Lesson 5 to describe the functions of each barrier. The key points of the lesson's activity are that pathogens use virulence factors to overcome host immune barriers, and interactions between pathogen and host result in clearance of the infection, chronic infection, or death of the host. We'll get there by playing the war card game. The goal of the card game is to give students broad exposure to how a number of different microbes become pathogenic when they evade, defeat, outcompete immune responses and body defenses. Before you play, you may want to walk through one case to make sure all students understand the rules of the game. The following slides walk through how to play the war card game. Each group will need the following materials: activity cards for both the body and pathogen. The body cards are in blue and the pathogen cards are in pink. Wild cards for both the body and the pathogen. 3 judges tables, and a coin for the coin toss to determine who wins the wild card. Each person will need the lesson worksheet, which includes questions for the do now and wrap up, instructions for the game, and tables to keep track of the outcomes of the game. Ideally, the game should have 5 players, 2 on the pathogen team, 2 on the body defense team, and 1 judge. The game has 3 main steps that repeat. The judge chooses a case. Both teams play a card in response, the pathogen team first, then the defense team. And both teams can elect to play a wild card, and whichever team wins the coin toss gets to keep that wild card. The pathogen players are on the offense and play a card that is most likely to make the person or host sick. The body defense players play a card that is the most likely to protect the host from the pathogen. After each round, the judge will use scoring tables to determine the final scores. There are 3 potential outcomes. The pathogen can win, and this is case of an uncontrolled infection. the body defenses can win, and this is a case of an infection cleared. Or there can be a tie, and this is a case of a controlled or persistent infection. Now let's review how to play the game. First, take 5 minutes to review your cards. After reading a case, the pathogen team will have maximum 2 minutes, as monitored by the judge, to select a disease card to play that is most likely and the most dangerous to be contracted under the circumstances in the case. Note that once you play a pathogen card, you can't reuse it in subsequent cases. Next, the body defense team has maximum 2 minutes, as monitored by the judge, to play a card that is the most appropriate defense against the disease card and provides the maximum host protection based on the circumstances. Assume that the host is naive, has no immune memory to each pathogen. Note that body defense cards can be replayed in subsequent cases. The pathogen and body defense teams may then choose to play an appropriate wildcard. To receive the points, the team must win a coin toss. Note that wildcards can be played only once. The judge will then award the final points from the tables. Judges, don't let the players see the scoring tables and keep track of the time. Now is the time to have a discussion on the cards you played and the scores you received. Let's see the game in action. In case 1, we see Jose is playing outside in the woods when he falls and punctures his knee deeply on a sharp piece of wood. The pathogen team now has 2 minutes to decide what pathogen card to play. Let's say that the pathogen team selected Vibrio cholera, an infection of the intestines. The judge would look at the table and see that cholera gets 0 points for case 1, so the judge tells the team to try again. Again, the pathogen team has 2 minutes to pick the right pathogen card. Let's say this time, however, they choose a different pathogen, tetanus. The judge looks at the table and sees that for case 1, tetanus gets 9 points. Excellent choice. Now it's the body defense team's turn, and they have 2 minutes to play a card against tetanus. Let's say the body defense team picks mucus. The judge looks at the table and sees that against tetanus, mucus leads to 0 points, so the body defense team has to try again. Again, the body defense team gets 2 minutes, but let's say this time they choose B cells, a type of white blood cell. The judge looks at the table and sees that B cells against tetanus gets 8 points. Excellent choice. Let's summarize so far. The pathogen team selected tetanus, the body defense team selected B cells. Now the teams can decide if they want to pick a wildcard. After picking a wildcard, in this case the body defense team chooses tetanus and the pathogen wildcard chose malnutrition. They then flip a coin and see who wins. The judge pulls out the judges' table for the wildcards to determine how many points each team would receive if they had won. In this case, the body defense team wins with 3 extra points. Now it's time to pick another case and really have fun. It usually takes 1 or 2 cases to get accustomed to the game, and then there will be a fair amount of arguing about why the points are being awarded one way or the other. And this is really the main point of the game: to learn new information about pathogens, learn new information that's on the wildcards, and think about how that might be. How that interaction between pathogen and the host adds up to pathogenicity. The key point of the wrap-up is to reflect on the pathogens introduced in the card game. We'll get there by considering the following 2 questions. Which virulence factor impresses you the most, and what disease has symptoms that impress you the most? The key point of the homework is to review the pathogens and immune barriers presented in the card game. We'll get there by having students complete their lesson worksheets and study for the quiz on Unit 3. One of the most common questions students ask is how were the points in the judges' tables assigned? A group of microbiologists and immunologists selected the points. The points are based on how relevant each play is and how likely the pathogen or immune system is to clear or control the infection. At the beginning of the next lesson, collect the lesson worksheets to assess each student's answers to the worksheet questions. This lesson wraps up Unit 3, which focused on adaptations and situations that contribute to microbes being pathogenic. In the next unit, we learn more about how these pathogenic microbes cause disease. Don't forget, if you have any questions, concerns, or feedback, to let us know. You can contact any of the CTSE team members, and we'll be happy to help you.